Good afternoon and welcome to Money Tips. This is Charles Kelly from London on a sunny April afternoon here in the UK in London, and hope you are well wherever you are. Obviously we're hearing terrible reports about things going on in the world, and we just hope that we can get through this crisis as quickly as possible. Let's just hope and pray that we can do that. Now, in the UK, in the financial news, you may have seen when you buy something that if you buy something online with a debit card, as you're checking out, you get this message, or maybe after you've checked out, saying, would you like to spread the payments on this? And it might come from PayPal or your debit card company or your bank. And they're offering you to, giving you the chance to, something you've already bought, to now spread the cost of this. And it's really an advert to get you into spreading the cost of it. It's a loan, really. It's credit or finance, and you may have seen these things. It's fairly new, this, and in the past, when you paid for something on a debit card or with PayPal, that would be it. You paid for it, and that comes out of your account. Now they're saying, no, you don't need to pay for it right now. You can spread the cost of it. Now, a group of charities now are warning that this is becoming a bit of a crisis, because people are clicking on this button and thinking that it's going to be interest free, but finding out later down the road that maybe there's interest charges there, or maybe if you don't pay it off within a certain time, then you're hit with interest. That's usually what interest free credit is, because clearly, why would a bank lend money out interest free? It costs them to get the money. Why are they going to lend it out interest free? And the answer is usually that it's interest free up to a point, maybe for a month, 6 months, a year. And then the interest kicks in with a vengeance. Excuse me. And then you get this also with credit card offers, like transfer your balance over interest free. However, there's usually a cost. There's usually a fee of 2 or 3%. So is that interest? Is that fee? No. Well, let's say it's interest free. But then after that period, which might be 9 months, a year, or even longer, you then start paying interest. And that's where people forget to start paying down this debt. And the Citizens Advice, it used to be called the Citizens Advice Bureau. It's a network, a legal network, a charity for money and consumer groups, said that many users are getting into debt and struggling to pay for even things like food and bills. And it's called now BNPL, buy now, pay later. It's nothing new, is it? It's just a new way of getting you into borrowing money, isn't it? And it's increasingly popular amongst young people buying stuff online and in high street lenders, high street outlets as well. And the Citizen Advice are now saying that consumers are start to regret using this scheme. And it said that many of the BNPL firms are not following the correct regulation, and they've called for tougher regulation. It found that nearly half of 18 to 34-year-olds have used this payment option in the last 12 months. And the repayment offer is, as I said, usually advertised at online checkouts. And it looks very easy, but the charity network, said that you're on a slippery slope into debt. And consumer debt, as we know, is the worst kind of debt. It's usually the most expensive debt, and you're buying stuff that is almost worthless after you've paid for it. You can't get your money back on it. It's certainly not going to grow in value. And then you're paying interest rates of 18, 30, 40% even sometimes on consumer debt. So they're now calling for regulation, and the average person now is paying £63 a month, but almost 2 in 5 who have used the scheme, that's 5 million people have used this scheme, said they didn't think it was proper borrowing. That's not borrowing. You're spreading your payments, but they don't think of it as borrowing. And 6 million people didn't even understand that what they were getting into, what they were signing up for. And it's easy, because if you're on your phone and some offer comes, you just click the button. You can't even read all these terms and conditions on a computer screen, let alone on a phone. So you just click the buttons or worry about it later. And the BBC have got into this, and they reported that one lady, Sharon Jitt, whose story was also covered by the Citizens Advice, got into trouble. But here's the story, right? Now, you can blame the finance company or you can blame the person, but she bought goods for £600 and then used the BNPL scheme. I said, right, I'll pay in instalments. However, then she said she didn't get the goods, she didn't receive the goods, and then cancelled her payments to the firm while she waited for the issues to be sorted out. But in the meantime, the firm then went through its procedures. No, you've got to pay us. You owe us money. And it went all the way, and she started getting debt collector letters, which usually comes after you ignore a letter. If you get a company who said you owe us money and you ignore it, then they will then eventually put it out to debt collectors. So you must communicate with people you owe money to, even if you're behind with the payments, whether it's a mortgage, a car loan, whatever. Always keep in touch, because once it goes to debt collectors, then costs go up, and the costs eventually end up with you. And then if the debt collector then goes to court, then you're really in trouble. And now she said it could affect her credit score, because the credit company has probably issued a default notice, which again comes as a last resort. But it's very easy to get a default notice. They just have to press a button saying this person is in default. And it's very much like a county court judgment, which they have to go into court to get. But with a default notice, they don't have to do that. They can just press a button. It's very unfair, actually, that they can just say, this person's defaulted on this. That's a default notice. That stays on your credit history for up to 6 years. It's very hard to remove. She's going to have to go to great lengths. If they've issued a default notice against her, that's equivalent to a county court judgment. It means she can't get a mortgage, very easily anyway. Certainly she's going to have trouble even getting an electricity account or a gas account to pay her bill monthly. Phones, mobile phone contracts, all these things, they're doing credit checks. Even to rent a property now, you have to be credit clean and pass credit scores and this sort of thing just to rent a property, let alone buy somewhere. It's almost harder to rent some properties, actually. So that's, she's got into herself a lot of trouble there. And the firm said they were referring me on to some debt collector. She said she's never had trouble online shopping before. So that's just one example. And the charity found that a quarter of consumers regretted using these platforms, with consumers frequently saying that they couldn't afford the repayments. Well, if they can't afford the repayments, which are split from the original amount, why are they buying the goods in the first place? If you're buying something for £600 and they say, well, we'll split it into £600 a month payments, and then you can't afford them, then why are you buying £600 worth of stuff, clothes? It doesn't add up to me. Yes, this firm might be at fault, and we know that, but clearly I can see that she hasn't really been communicating with them properly. She's probably just buried her head in the sand, and I don't want to open that letter because I can see it's underneath the window, it's red, and I know that that's going to be more stress. And you pile it up in the corner and don't open the letter. However, I don't know the whole story there, but Alistair Cromwell's the chief executive of Citizen Advice, said, buy now, pay later borrowing can be like quicksand. You know what quicksand is? When you step in it, you can't get out, you're struggling to get out. It's easy to unwittingly slip into debt and much more difficult to get out of. Well, that's the same for any debt. It's easy to borrow money. Yeah, you get letters, don't you? Borrow money, increase your credit limit. Have this on us. And they always use words like amount available to spend, not amount to borrow. They say your credit card, this is your balance, and this is the amount available to spend. Because spend's a much nicer word, isn't it, than save. Save is boring. It's putting your pocket money into a piggy bank where you see it disappear down this slot, never to be seen again. It's, oh, I want to buy sweets. So saving is always pain. Spending is nice. It's pleasure. So that's why they use the words on the credit card. They say amount available to spend. And it's lovely to go out and spend money, isn't it? So that's great. And that's why people get into that. It's this language they use. And, it's obviously a common problem. It's nothing new. It's just a new way of dealing with things. Really. It's just a new way of getting people into debt and borrowing money. So don't get hooked into this. That's what I'm saying. Really, don't get hooked into this. And I'd say to wrap this up, really, the industry apparently has more than trebled in 2020. So it's a big money spinner. And there are several firms involved in the BNPL market, maybe companies you might never have heard of. I certainly haven't heard of all of them. Klarna, Klarna, but you might not see that company when you tick the option initially. ClearPay, Laybuy, Laybuy, quite a clever name, and PayPal are all into this market. But when you buy I've seen it on my unbanked credit debit card. I don't know which company's behind it when they're offering to spread the payments. But a charity just warned that 4 out of 10 people are now struggling to make these repayments. So you've got to be very careful. Other news, City of London. The City of London is a financial district of London. And if you go there now, when I worked in the city, it was kind of quaint old buildings and nice old pubs, and people would do business in the pub over a pint of Young's Bitter. And everyone smoked in those days, so it was smoke everywhere. And there was these quirky little streets and offices. But now you go there, it's like a modern city with huge buildings, some of the biggest buildings in Europe. The Shard and the Gherkin and all these massive iconic buildings, if you like. And yeah, it's great. And it's a very modern place, glass buildings all over the place. Now, there are thousands and thousands of offices in the city, and most of them are occupied by banks and financial firms. Now, obviously, during the pandemic, a lot of people have gone back to work at home. And firms are saying, well, you can stay at home. Some firms are even saying, well, you can come back in to work for a couple of days a week. Now, this is a phenomenon not just in the City of London, but in other big cities in America. So people are starting to flee the city and certainly parts of London. They're trying to sell their little studios in London, and then they can buy a much bigger place out in the countryside or in the suburbs, where they can have more space. They don't have to share the lifts or elevators with anybody. They feel safer. And, for the money that they can get their small flat in London, they can probably buy a house somewhere way out of town or 100 miles out in a nice country area. And that's why prices are going up in the countryside, even in parts of Wales, which is, hundreds of miles from London. And people feel, now I can work from home. Some people are even going abroad and saying, well, I can work from Portugal or Spain and still do my work. Which is true. I don't think the city is dying completely. I mean, a commercial surveyor told me the other day, he's a good friend of mine, that offices are refiguring their offices. They're configuring how they're going to use their office. Maybe they're changing the way the space is used, but there's no mass exodus as yet. And I think eventually firms will want people to come back in. There's more of that group dynamic going on. But the City of London is the corporation that control the city. They're like almost a private corporation in the middle of London. They've even got their own police force, the City of London Police. So they're like a district of London. And they are planning to convert thousands of office units into residential units. And this will be done over the next few years. But there's already plans there to, this is the Corporation of London planning to convert thousands of office buildings into residential. So that's an unusual move. And obviously we've seen Brexit happen as well, where in the Brexit deal with the European Union, the City of London was not really covered in that. And I think the fishermen have also been thrown under the bus, and the city, I don't think, have been fully covered by this, and business is already starting to go away from the city. So the city has to reinvent itself once again, as it's done over hundreds of years. Because don't forget, the insurance market started in the Square Mile, in that city opposite the Bank of England. That's where the insurance market started. Many of the financial markets were started in the City of London, 300-400 years ago, and they've had to keep reinventing themselves. So they will do that, I'm sure. And of course, the city used to be the port of London. The ports have moved out. They've survived that again. Even the Docklands now has become an extension of the city as offices and flats and residential and shops. That used to be the docks of London. So the city, I'm sure, will reinvent itself. But for the moment, there's going to be some major shifts in property. Other news, over 50s are hardest hit by unemployment. The over 50s, which, believe it or not, covers me, are the people who are most likely to lose their job and the people who are likely to take longer to recover and get back into a job, more than the young people. In the news last year, it was more that young people were losing their jobs. But young people are bouncing back now as retail opens up, as cafes and pubs start to open up. But the Resolution Foundation said that older workers are taking the longest to get back into work. And you're not supposed to have ageism in the workplace, but it goes on. Even if someone doesn't put their age on a CV, you can look back and see, they went to school in 1949, or they went to university. I think you guess their age. So it's difficult. And obviously, I suppose most firms would like to employ someone who's young and energetic and just come out of university and is really keen, than some older person that's got a lot of issues. I don't think I could work for someone again, but maybe I'm a bad example. But clearly ageism goes on in the workplace, just like sexism and racism, no doubt. But the older people are finding it harder to get back into work. So that's an interesting phenomenon. I know that older people maybe have more savings behind them than younger people, but an older person in their 50s probably hasn't got the option of moving in with their parents again if things go wrong. Now, look, whilst I think the effects of the last year's recession, when the economy in the UK declined by nearly 10%, the most, I think, on record, or certainly since the war, I don't think the effects have hit most people yet. Why? Because we've had the job furlough, the rent and mortgage payment holidays, the ban on eviction of tenants, stamp duty holidays to boost the property market, even the return of 95% mortgages, and other government financial stimulus packages to boost the economy, to boost the stock market, to get banks out lending money again. And these have cushioned people from the full blow of the COVID-led economic downturn. We know that, right? So similar packages are running in the US, and many of these stimulus packages are coming to an end. So in the UK, landlords can start processing eviction claims against tenants who may have refused to pay. So we know this is happening, right? And, whilst the government are telling people, go out and spend money, yeah, this is not probably the time to, spend £600 of money you don't have to buy clothes you cannot afford on credit. This is not the time to do those sort of things. Now, there's good debt and there's bad debt. An example of good debt is borrowing money to buy assets like a business or a property, which puts money into your pocket. Even your home, I think of that as good debt. It's not a business home, but it puts a roof over your head, usually at a cheaper monthly payment than rent. But an example of bad debt is the lady we mentioned in the BBC example who bought £600 worth of clothes and said, I can't afford it. Or other people have bought stuff and then spread the payments and can't even afford the repayments, let alone the amount they're wanting to buy stuff for. What do you need £600 worth of clothes for just like that? Anyway, I'm prejudging, but that's an example of bad debt. Another example of bad debt, or even what I would call crazy debt, is borrowing money to buy risky investments such as Bitcoin and even the shares. Now, we know what happened. The 1930s stock market crash was caused, part of it was caused by banks lending money to people to buy shares. They call it margins. So they would say, well, if you want to buy $100 of shares, we'd lend you 2/3 of that or 75% of that, and then we hold the shares in as security. But when the shares then went down, there were margin calls. The bank said, well, your shares are now worth less than you owe, and we want our money back. So people then were made bankrupt. The banks were left holding the baby, and the shares had gone down by 60-70% in some cases. And that could happen to Bitcoin. People are borrowing money to buy Bitcoin, which goes up and down like a yo-yo. I mean, it hit a peak of something like 65,000 the other day, went down by 10 or 20% in a day. So that to me just seems to be crazy to borrow that sort of thing. And that's why most banks, in fact, wouldn't lend you money to buy shares. They would lend you money to buy a property, but they wouldn't lend you money to go and buy shares and then hold those as security. But it does happen in some places. There are companies in America now that are lending money to people to buy Bitcoin. It is unbelievable, but it's true. Now you can see some other articles I've written earlier about the 95% mortgages, about what I think is property buyers overpaying for properties to save a few £1,000s on stamp duty. Sometimes they're paying like 50,000 more than the property is really worth or was worth 6 months ago, just to save maybe £5,000 in stamp duty. It doesn't make sense. There's a mad scramble to buy properties and complete by the end of June. But what's going to happen after the end of June? Well, we don't know. We don't know what the market is really going to do. Nobody really does. But it does seem to me like we've had a long bull market, which means the market is going up in property and shares, certainly since 2008. And that never lasts forever. It just doesn't happen. It's never happened since I've been looking at the markets, and I've seen several property recessions which took many years to recover. Where in the 90s, where it took 6 years, when I bought a property early 90s, and it took 6 years before it was worth what I paid for it at that time. And I was living in it. It didn't really matter whether it was going up or down as such, but it shows you. And it can happen. It can happen. So just be careful. Don't overstretch yourself. Don't go out and buy silly things on credit that you can't afford, because this is a risky job market as well. As the furlough scheme comes to an end, we know that companies are closing down branches. We know that companies are slimming down their operations. We know that they're using more AI, Zoom, more technology to save money. I was on a Zoom seminar with Bloomberg yesterday, and there's a company that's been bought out by Amazon that they already have this kind of robo taxi, if you like, that they want to roll out in cities where you'd have an app. You press the button, the taxi comes, the doors open automatically. It takes you to where you want to go safely and smoothly and all that. And this is already here. It's not science fiction anymore. So how is that going to affect the thousands of Uber drivers? I mean, there's already taxis. You can call a taxi on an app with an Uber driver. Now they're going to cut them out. They've got these robo taxis, electric cars. And this is a company. It's now owned by Amazon. So this is not a small outfit, and there are other companies in that market as well. So just be careful. This is not the time, I think, to splash out on silly consumer debt things, because you could find yourself getting caught with your pants down when the tide goes out and the market changes. So I just want to talk about one other thing. And there's a webinar on tomorrow night, which is discovering the high value and high demand cash flow strategy anyone can use to get into property. It's on tomorrow night, 7 p.m. For 2 days. It's a 2-day summit, and it's called the Rent to Service Accommodation Summit. This is where you can control properties without necessarily owning them, but you can control properties. You don't have to take a mortgage. You don't need credit scores, and then you can take the hassle away from the landlord of dealing with tenants, and you can turn this into serviced accommodation and make large profits. Now, the full details, I'm putting a link up here. You can see the full details. Have a look at it. It's how anyone can make basically £1,000 a month from properties that they don't have to own, how you can consistently get full-time income from property without mortgages or refurbs or any tenant headaches, and how you can apply this system to almost any properties, including properties you don't own. And in other words, you can get into this to create a passive income without having masses of capital. So have a look at that. I know the strategy works. I've seen it work. I've seen people come in from parts of Europe into this country with nothing in their pocket. They've attended a seminar, a training scheme, and they're up and running. Later on, they might want to buy their own properties, but at the moment, you don't even need to do that.